The way that people react to a risk communication is only partly determined by the content and channel. The source of the communication matters too, which is the focus of this segment. A central issue here is trust, whether people trust the source. Without trust, we wouldn't expect people to be receptive to the information provided or to act upon it. What do we mean by trust? Well, there are many definitions. Confidence that the other party will provide what's desired, a kind of generalized expectation that the word, promise, or statement of another individual or group can be relied on, or that information will be complete and truthful. We can think about trust in risk communication as a set of stacking boxes, with the individual communicator at the center, part of a larger organizational and institutional structure. In the first box, we've got confidence in the individual, then confidence in the organization at a particular time and on a particular issue. That's sometimes referred to as specific trust. Then we've got the credibility of the institution based on its past and overall performance. And then the macro level, public generalized social trust, the general institutional context. Thinking first about the individual communicator, if a government agency needs to communicate a risk, say, who's likely to be the most persuasive spokesperson? An expert on the risk, perhaps a scientist, doctor, or engineer. A person who has a high level of accountability in managing the risk, a specific risk manager, or a communications specialist, like a public relations specialist or public information officer, or a celebrity, somebody the audience knows and connects with. Studies in this area find that the appearance, style, and attractiveness of the communicator do matter, even if it might seem superficial. And so does the degree of identification of the audience with the individual. If they feel that they hold core, relevant values in common with a communicator, they're more likely to listen to them and to act on their advice. Such findings may seem intuitive, but organizations often seem to get this wrong. Rather than thinking about who audiences will connect with, they stick to their usual hierarchy and put a senior manager in front of the camera, even if that individual doesn't have knowledge of the risk issue at hand. Or in a participatory process, a scientist with deep domain knowledge but limited skills in speaking in the language and style of the audience might be put in charge of facilitating a consultation. Clearly, risk comms can be more effective when an organization pays attention to these issues of trust when it comes to selecting who communicates. Turning now to the organizational level, we see that trust is linked to perceived competence. That's something that's built up over long periods of time. And although it takes time to establish, it can be lost quickly, what Paul Slovic refers to as the asymmetry principle. So how does an organization avoid losing trust in a challenging situation? Think of a food agency in the midst of a baby food contamination scare. Say the actual risk assessed by experts may be low, but the sensitivity of the issue is such that public perceptions of the risk are running high. A regulatory agency needs to communicate effectively to avoid panic and prevent additional negative consequences, like parents giving less nutritious or even potentially harmful alternatives to infants. In the midst of a crisis like that one, experience suggests that an organization can maintain trust by communicating openly and honestly. In studies, transparency is usually strongly connected to public trust. Conversely, silence about risks seems to be a very reliable trigger of distrust. Sometimes organizations with a clear stake in the process are concerned about communicating because they may be seen by the audience as just seeking to justify themselves. But insights from experiments offer some interesting findings in this regard. First, explicitly stating a persuasive intent is usually more convincing than hiding such an intent and leaving it to the audience to discern it for themselves. Second, perceived fairness can compensate for lack of objectivity. For example, if the communicator has a vested interest but appears to be fair to counter-arguments and is perceived to have technical authority, they can still garner trust. Agreeing to listen to contrary viewpoints increases the chances that the audience attitude to an issue will change. Next, presenting counter-arguments appears to be effective when addressing an audience that initially holds a contrary view. The perception that goals and motives of the source serve a common public interest enhances public confidence. Conversely, the perception of a private or selfish interest leads people to discount the information from the source. In addition to technical competence, then, demonstrating objectivity without bias, fairness, and adequate representation of all points of view, consistency, and good faith all help to maintain trust. This may seem an impossibly demanding set of criteria for an organization to reach. But in fact, it seems that a risk communicator may not have to be rated highly by its audience on all of these components. Instead, good performance in one area may compensate for deficiencies in another. For example, a food company might not be perceived as objective when communicating about a contamination risk, but it can still be trusted if it can demonstrate fairness by acknowledging different points of view and showing goodwill by, for example, withdrawing stocks of a potentially contaminated product. At the broadest level, generalized trust in government and institutions is certainly also important. In fact, some studies find that it's more strongly correlated with people's willingness to listen to risk information than specific trust in any particular organization. Well, clearly, there's nothing an individual or a single organization can do to restore generalized trust. The question is more whether an organization can create and sustain islands of trust in this challenging context. With time, the answer is almost certainly yes. A worrying trend then noted in the literature is a long-term decline in generalized trust in some high-income countries in recent decades. On the other hand, the relative position of different institutions have been stable. Scientists routinely appear among the most trusted. And in a more positive light, some experts see the skepticism or critical distrust shown by the public towards many institutions actually as a good thing. They argue that this attitude to institutions can constrain excessive power of economic elites and see this as allowing technical experts the opportunity to ensure appropriate oversight and vigilance over public and corporate actions.